So what is Agile? Everybody here probably heard of it already, and even if you haven't worked in it, you've been exposed to it in some way. So it's a group of software methodology. There is no one Agile. There is no, this is Agile, right? Agile is a collection. It's a collection of different methodologies that came about really as a solution to all the problems that developers were seeing on software projects. In the 80s and 90s, when software projects was taking off, it was just a crazy, crazy time for software building because the project management paradigm that they used to develop software, it just failed, right? Software was coming in over budget. The scope was out of this world. What you delivered to the client was normally never what the client really expected. And it was just costly and stressful. And the developers were stressed out and the project managers were stressed out, and you never got what you wanted. So it was impeding the progress of how we can build software and we can move the world forward. So all of these different methodologies were invented between the late 80s and early 90s, and they practiced some of them. And by 2001, they came up with the Agile Manifesto, where they decided these were the principles that we're going to live by under whichever Agile methodology that we choose, right? So it's a group of software development methodologies centered around iterative development. So you develop some, you release, you develop, you release, you develop, you release. So everything is iterative. It's not linear. It's not waterfall. It's not start here, do everything for this phase here, and then you keep moving down until you get to implementation. That just doesn't work anymore, right? So we had to get rid of that. So at the end of the day, the Agile methodologies is your requirements and solutions evolve. They evolve. They're not created and stay static. They are evolving through collaboration, through discussion, through meetings, right? Between self-organizing cross-functional teams. So you put different people together with different expertise, and we kind of self-organize and build the product based on the collaboration that we had during those sessions, right? So it allows a faster delivery. Its response to change is collaborative, right? So there are many different types of Agile that we talked about. The one that's the most popular is the Agile Scrum methodology. And that's the one where the user story we're about to talk about is going to be most helpful. Although the user story was not invented in Scrum, and I'll talk about that in a second. So everybody's seen this slide, right? Where they see this is how Agile works. So you have a vision, which is by the product owner or the product manager normally. And then there's a bunch of items that needs to accomplish this vision. But we're not going to do it all at once. We're not going to do everything in this what we call backlog. We're going to slice off a few of it that makes sense, build that iteratively. It goes into this planning process. It goes into implementation. It goes into review. There's a retrospective. And then we have an increment, which means that we were able to ship this body, this bit of backlog. So we've taken off some that makes sense to the user. Everything has to have value to the user. We're going to build only this piece, and then we're able to ship it. We may not ship it right away, but we are able to if we wanted to. Let's say, for example, I am building an e-commerce system. Maybe I build a login screen, right? And I make sure I can verify the email, all that stuff. When I'm done, that login screen is shippable if I wanted to. And then the next thing I'd build would maybe be the product pages. So each of those things could be a part of a sprint. And at the end of the sprint, we have an increment. So we have the increment for the login, an increment for the product, an increment for, the payment processing, et cetera, et cetera. At the end of the whole thing, the vision of the product is accomplished, but we don't have to do the whole thing at once. We don't have to build the entire system before we can see if it's working and validate it, okay? So in Agile Scrum, you have these roles, right? There are three main roles, which is the product owner, the dev team, and the Scrum Master. So those are the three roles that's in the Agile Scrum methodology, which is not all of Agile, just Scrum, and Scrum is the most popular one, right? So as you noticed, there's no business analyst in Agile Scrum. How did that happen? Well, it did. It did. Unfortunately, it did. So what's happening now is that the business analyst is playing a role when they're in an Agile team to support the product owner, to help the product owner to make the right decision on the backlog. The product owner has a sole responsibility for what gets into the sprint, They decide the priority of what we're going to work on, but they need help, right? And that's where the business analyst is coming in, where we're helping them to write the user stories. We're helping them to understand the priority. They are dictating what to build, but we go in there and make all the details happen, right? So that's how it typically works if you have a product owner and a business analyst on the team. Some teams don't have that. Some teams is only product owner. Some teams is only business analyst. So if you have them both, that's what the roles typically are. So with that background into Agile, we're going to move on to user stories. Before I move on, I know I said keep the questions at the end, but is there any burning questions about Agile that I could answer real quick before I get into user stories? That's a good sign. If there's no burning question. Oh, go ahead. Somebody's saying something. Go.
Hi, Karaleise. This is Francie. Just wondering, why wouldn't a business analyst be considered part of the dev team if you need to write the user stories in order to be able to create a product?
Because the dev team typically has a very specified role. Their role is to determine how to build what we want. The role of the product owner, the business analyst, the product manager is to figure out what. So you need to build the right thing. What is the right thing? Once you figure out what the right thing is, the developers figure out how to make it happen. So the business analyst doesn't really sit in either the business or dev. They sit kind of in between. They are the bridge. They're the ones figuring out what the business needs. And sometimes they have to communicate that back to the product manager, or the product manager communicates it down to them. So there's some back and forth going on there. But once it's agreed on what it is, now you need to translate it in a way that the developers can go off and write code. It's too much to ask the developers to understand what to build and how to build it, right? Because they're not on the business side. They're technical people. They're very detailed. So they need someone to be that bridge, to be the translator between the two, to be able to document the business needs in such a way that the developers can have that buffer to talk to and to know how to, what's the best approach to build it right. So business analysts, what to build the right thing. Developers, build it right, right? You need to know how. So we don't know how. We don't know how to write code. We don't know what's the best component. We don't know what's the best technology. The developers know that, but they don't know what to apply it to. We know that because we know what the problem is that we're trying to solve. So I don't believe the business analyst is really a dev team member. I mean, in organizations, you can put them under whichever org chart, it's okay. But honestly, the business analyst is doing more than development. They're not a technical resource. They're a business resource. And that's why I wouldn't put them as a part of the dev team.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. So any other burning question real quick?
Yeah, I was not a burning question. I just wanted to wrap that up to understand this from my perspective. A BA is not a subject matter expert. A dev is an SME. Yeah?
Yes, it depends. So the BA typically interfaces with the subject matter expert to understand the use case. Absolutely. But the subject matter expert doesn't interface directly with the developers. The BA then takes that knowledge that they have gained from this SME and communicates it to the dev team because they understand the kind of technical questions that they'll ask. So for example, if I speak with, you're into healthcare, right, Dawn?
That's right.
If I speak to a practitioner or a nurse or something, and they tell me all the problems why there's something wrong with the system, I have to ask the right questions to understand the problem they're having properly. And then I take that problem and I come up with a solution, do all the back and forth. Now I need to interface with dev. So dev is going to ask me, why are we creating this system? Can we use a drop down versus a table? Will that solve the problem? Like they'll come up with different technical things that the nurse practitioner doesn't need to know, but I need to know. So that's the reason why we're the bridge, because once I understand it from the SME, I become the SME to dev. If that makes sense. So then you're kind of translating that knowledge. That's where the translation comes in, where I understand it from the subject matter experts, and then with my understanding, come up with a solution, and then articulate that to developers so they can build code to solve the problem that was the original problem.
Right. Okay. So I'm just thinking I've most probably just deviated just a little bit. So the dev person, the DevOps, or anyone who's writing code and stuff like that, they are not an SME?
They're SME in their area. They're SME in technology. They're a SME in the code. They're a SME in, how they're not a SME in the business and the business problem.
No, they're not a SME in clinical governance.
Exactly.
Oh, okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yes, awesome. All right. So we're going to jump back into the user stories.